Hi everyone! So this video is going to be about doing the princess seams. So if you've been following my other video tutorials in order, then you should have the ease stitching on the side front pieces and your sleeves. So there should be just a small, slight cap on both of those, and the cap should be going to the inside. So this is the outside of my fabric, it's capping on the inside, and you do that by pulling the strings that are on the top right side of the fabric. So now that I've done the ease stitching, it's time to start pinning these pieces together. So I know that this is my back piece, and I'm not going to start with that one right now. Instead, I'm going to start with this side front piece, especially where the plackets are going to go. So this is actually the outside, because I folded my fabric with right sides together when I placed and cut my pattern pieces. So let's take a look here. Okay, this fuzzy side, this is the right side of my fabric, and I want these two pieces to line up this way. Thinking here. Oh, right. So when you kind of visually look at it, it might look something like this, where there's a discrepancy in the length, but you have to remember that when you start pinning along a curve, that's going to eat up a lot of this fabric to match this fabric. The other thing is you want to match this notch with the top notch here, and this notch with this notch here. So you should test it with your fingers first. And you need to do it by pinching the right sides together. Okay. So if I just start placing okay, looks like my pattern that I used was a little uneven. I'm more concerned about the notches matching. So there's a little extra on top, that's okay. Now the tricky part. This fabric kind of holds when I stick it together, which is kind of nice. And I'm matching the tops as perfectly as possible. And I see when I did that, my notches did not end up matching. So that tells me that I need to pull this piece more. Just a little more. I'm doing it till the notches match up, essentially, but I'm still trying to make sure I don't gather or wrinkle this curve, because I don't want any tucks. So as you can see, I kind of pull one end a little bit, and then kind of use my hands to just kind of even it out across, and also make sure that I don't end up with tucks or wrinkles. I think this is as far as I could gather this piece here, because as you can see, it's starting to get really close to gathering or creating tucks. So this, you probably shouldn't go beyond this. So even if your notches don't match and you've gathered it this much, then I would just say it was possibly the pattern piece, or maybe, you know, you didn't copy something quite exactly, and just focus on getting the fabric sewn together, and then you might just end up with a little extra on the bottom, and that's okay because I will show you how to even out the bottom before you do the hem later on. Let's take another look here and see, starting from matching this notch. Oh, they're perfect. See? Meep, meep. I got them perfect. Okay. So we're all good now and ready to officially pin this piece. And I'm just taking a look here at how this might end, and voila, perfect. All right. So this piece is ready. Now I will show you a trick for making sure that you do not create any tucks. I noticed a lot of people were getting tucks in this chest breast area. I'm going to start by pinning as exactly as possible the same right here at that notch, and then just wait. Okay. So yeah, like I said, I end up with a little extra at the top here, but that's okay. I can just cut it off. I'm just slightly a little bit more concerned about the notches matching, because when I matched them up, you saw that it became pretty perfectly fitted. So now when you're trying to like pin this like wrinkled part to the straight part, you can match up the tops and stretch, do this kind of motion, like stretch them together backwards, and then grab it and pin it. Now I'm not changing any of the slightly eased part. I'm just forcing this fabric, the straight one, to stretch to kind of match better. See, when I stretch them together, they get less wavy. That allows me to pin easier. And just take your time and go slowly on this part. And stretch. And stretch. Oh, except when I stretched that part, it didn't stay all the way flat. So let me try that again. Okay. You want to make sure when you're doing this stretch motion that it's smoothing out across this entire area for the most part. Okay, pretty much at the end, at least of the wavy part. So this is what it's going to look like when it's pinned, and that's perfectly alright. If it makes you comfortable, you could even in between the pins do this stretching motion and just throw another pin in there, and that might further kind of help you to avoid any gathers or tucks. I could use one more here. And I might throw another one in right next to the beginning of that notch. Okay, so that's even like a little better, right? This is kind of the only place where I recommend that it's kind of okay to have a lot of pins. I mean, it will slow you down a lot having to go a little bit and pull out each little pin, but I think the end result is definitely worth it because you'll be able to not have to hopefully redo it because you won't find tucks or gathers, which you will get marked down on. And visually, if you don't know what I mean by tuck still, it's if you pinch the fabric in any way while you're sewing. I don't know if I can visually represent it here, but it would just create this line. Maybe I can show you here. Yeah, so this is a tuck right here. I pinched the fabric and then it, as a result, it is not smooth like the rest of the seam, and it'll create like a little indent and a little pucker. So that's what you're trying to avoid. It's okay if, you know, once in a while you encounter one and you just need to restitch that one area, hopefully. Though if you find that because of the tuck you have severely mismatched pieces or it's just pretty common down your seam, then at that point you might need to, you will need to make the decision of probably redoing that entire seam. So let's try and just avoid it in the first place. So the rest is easy peasy, lemon squeezy. And all of these princess seams, as a reminder, are 1/2 inch. Okay, so my pieces are put together here, and if you're not sure if you did it right, just preview it. I mean, the pins are pretty much like you sewed it, and this looks great, you know? I see that even when laying flat, this area that we have the E-stitching in, you know, starts to create this shape on its own, this little contour. And this is the outside of the fabric, so yes, it looks like we did it right, and then I can trim this discrepancy a little later after I've finished sewing. But otherwise, this part is ready and good to go. So I will sew this, and then I will give you some more tips on sewing the princess seams on the other piece. Alright, so I'm now sewing together the side front piece with the shirt front piece that has the plackets. So it's always best that you put the bubbly part on the top. And then I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna do these 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm gonna make sure my needle stays in the thread even when I take my foot off the pedal, and then also do my back stitching. Okay. And now you just want to be really careful and you want to monitor both. Sometimes you might even need to lift your fabric a little. Yep, everything's staying flat so far. Okay. Now notice I am using my 1/2 inch line. If you're doing this by machine, my 1/2 inch line is right here, and so I am keeping my fabric aligned. If you are doing hand stitching, then you need to make sure that you have measured out 1/2 inch seam down the whole way. You could do it with watercolor pencils, or if you bought fabric chalk, or even just a regular pencil, something that'll wash out, because you want to make sure when you're hand stitching that you are maintaining the same width, seam width. I take my pins out right at the very last minute. And notice I'm still monitoring the fabric underneath. Might even pull it over here so that I know it's not doing anything funky underneath. The area over here where I'm actually sewing is relatively flat, whereas this is not. So I'm paying attention to the area where it is sewing. This area might try to give me a tuck, so I'm just gonna kind of flatten it out with my finger. Sometimes you might even have to lift the foot. This is why it's really important to leave the needle in if using a machine, because then I can really stretch the fabric with both my fingers like this and kind of guarantee that it's gonna cooperate and not give me a tuck. And yes, I was, for the most part, able to avoid a tuck. So that's really good. Okay, the hardest part is almost over. Put that over there so it's out of my way, because I will remove the ease stitching probably after I've finished this seam. Yeah, and the rest of this is pretty easy peasy. Okay, so when you're pinning the back piece, or the side back pieces to the back, just remember that there will probably be a little triangle corner here where it just kind of, does that. That's okay. Just remember to put your right sides together. So in this case, the fuzzy side is my right side. And when you pinch the right sides together, the seam goes on the inside. And so yes, this is what the side back piece on the back piece should look like. Like that when it's pinned, which I didn't finish pinning. But so yes, you will just do this for the rest of your princess seams and the side front. remember this was the front, and this is the side front. This is where we had the chest contour. So in that case, then these two side pieces go together as well. And make sure to, again, match up your notches. So I got my notch nice and matched up. And so this is how I would pin this piece. And as always, all of these seams are 1/2 inch seam allowance.